Hey everyone, I'm Alex Fletcher, and thanks for joining me for episode 2 of the Esports IQ podcast series. In today's episode, we'll be exploring how the nature of video game content affects esports as a marketing communication channel. And if you're listening, you've probably heard some variation of the following stat that hundreds of millions of esports fans exist across the globe, which is typically associated with a thinly or not so thinly veiled reference of esports being or becoming more popular than insert whichever traditional sport league or maybe event of your choice. But one of the failings of this comparison between digital and traditional sport really overlooks massive differences between their content. For example, the most popular physical sports today are just ball games. I mean, their competition centers around controlling the movement of a ball. Whether you're kicking it, you're throwing it, you're picking it up and running with it, you're passing it, whether you're talking about soccer, basketball, cricket, rugby, tennis, or golf, the center of activity is a ball. Plain and simple, end of story. And the core similarity between different popular traditional sports is a big reason that the medium as a whole can be marketed as mainstream media. Because if you're a novice or less advanced fan or viewer, you can always just follow the ball to keep up. I mean, that's how sports highlights works. That's what allows outlets like ESPN to put together segments where they have highlights from different sports back to back because it's pretty easy to follow, right? Even if you don't know much about one of those sports, you can kind of watch it in a continuous loop pretty easily. And obviously there's much more to understanding sport at a high level, but that single object of focus makes it easier for more people to casually follow along and keep up. Now, when we switch into the realm of competitive video games and we talk about esport game titles, I mean, these are all infinitely more complex than a ball game. And spectating isn't a major issue just because everybody doesn't follow the game, but because there's no single dominant object of focus, right? I mean, I don't care how hardcore gamer you are, if you happen upon competitive game content for a title you've never seen or played before, odds are you're going to experience a degree of absolute cluelessness for a period of time. That's just what it is. And I think that's one of the main reasons that esports on TV just doesn't work well. It's been tried by a number of players, and there's been some success in certain places, but the reality is video game content is just extremely unlikely to resonate with like broad TV audiences the way that ball sports do. And that's not a bad thing, right? I just think that the nature of freely available digital broadcasts really help tap into the highly specific profile of game content interests and allow you to, or rather allow audiences to self-assemble in a more natural, organic way. Because as we saw with the closure of ESPN's dedicated efforts in covering competitive video games, it's not easy. There are a handful of endemic players who pull it off to a degree, but the same scale that exists within traditional sports is incredibly difficult, and in my opinion, it's probably closer to impossible. And maybe that's part of the problem, right? Maybe you have that gold standard that is traditional sports that causes people to kind of make that false comparison with esports. But I think you could more realistically argue that esports is still very much a subset of gaming media that isn't quite ready to exist as a standalone discipline the way its traditional sport cousin does. And a lot of this stems from the difference between watching other humans perform athletically and watching video games being played by other humans. And I'm going to repeat that. I think there's a big difference between watching other humans perform athletically and watching video games being played by other humans. By that I mean sports are a really complex form of people watching, and as an avid people watcher, I think there's something inherent to our species with regards to watching other humans. But esports is a form of watching games. And it's one of the reasons that games-based media sits outside mainstream media And that's because the human element is secondary to the medium. And compared to topics like politics, entertainment, and sports, that's a big difference. But I do think that difference leaves a huge opportunity for brand marketing to tie the human element into it and tell the types of stories that don't that fall through the gaps because of this difference. Ultimately, human activity in the physical world is more visually familiar than human activity by proxy in a digital environment, because there's no getting around the fact that a Ronaldo header or a blistering serve by Serena Williams is striking imagery that just registers with the human hindbrain, where something like the League of Legends pentakill is extremely contextual, or it's highly relevant to the League community and those who care, but that's about it. And this directly affects the presentation value of competitive video game content. But it also affects brand association with esports. In my opinion, logo placement on a jersey being worn by a superstar athlete during a popular traditional sporting event really puts that brand center stage, because the athlete is center stage. The athlete is the performer. It's the human element that is the source of drama in sport that gives that brand association its value. Whereas logo placement on a top digital sport participant sitting behind a screen for most of a broadcast that's focused on images from a video game is just a different equation. It's not that one is better, but just that they're totally different. See, in esports, the drama and action unfold within the game itself, meaning the visual appeal is dictated by in-game action. And this relationship affects the media value of esports content, since it can't directly rely on more familiar human-based imagery that propels top athletic performers in sport to superstar status and lends tremendous recognizability to winning teams. Because at this point in history, esports is more directly related to the longevity of game titles than it is for teams and players. But in turn, it complicates the return on investment formula for sponsorship of those same teams and players in esports. Companies like Nike have generated billions in revenue over the years by ingratiating their brand logo with sport activities performed by the likes of generational athletes such as LeBron James. But it's the sheer physicality of dunking a basketball that provides a canvas for almost endless creative. And brands like Nike have used this canvas to create compelling campaigns around the spirit of sport. It also doesn't hurt that elite athletic performance represents an ideal form of human motion, dating all the way back to the origins of Western civilization. Fast forward to today, brands can align with this ideal to connect with billions of humans and consumers across the world. But the reality is, gaming has an entirely different energy. And the exact same approach doesn't carry over into esports, whether you feel that gaming is considered a sport or not. Because there's a very real icon status that accompanies success in traditional sport, but doesn't yet exist in competitive video games today. That means brand association with the medium are going to be a lot more context sensitive. So if you're used to mainstream communication channels, such as those prevalent in traditional sports, it can take some getting used to. See, esports inherits a lot of counterculture elements from gaming, which means it never has been and probably never really will be comfortable fitting in with pop culture the same way that traditional sports does. Plus, gaming still suffers from a lot of negative social stigma. So right now, the comparison of digital sport to other forms of competition, it just isn't apples to apples. Because until it gains more widespread acceptance as a viable outlet for human energy, esports will continue to function as a massively popular niche. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because even today, esports is perfectly suited as a marketing channel for cracking the hard-to-reach world of online gaming. And there's more than enough value from that to go around. But it's still important to set the appropriate expectations by first understanding what it is and isn't. And the best way to do that is to grasp the undeniable differences between video game play and traditional athletics. So thanks for joining me for another episode of the Esports IQ podcast series. Please stay tuned for more content coming soon. Take care and goodbye.